The blood-red sunrise painted the horizon as Samuel Porter stood at the edge of his unfinished homestead, sweat already beading on his brow despite the early hour. The vast Montana territory stretched before him like an untamed promise. The year 1872, marking his second summer in this rugged paradise, just outside the small settlement of Republic. His calloused hands gripped the worn handle of his axe, muscles tensing as he prepared for another day of relentless labor on the land he'd claimed as his own. 3 miles away, in a modest cabin nestled between towering pines, Olivia Norwood awoke to the same sunrise. Her delicate fingers traced the empty space beside her on the bed, a habit formed in the 2 months since her husband's passing. The loneliness of widowhood at 23 felt like a weight pressing against her chest, nearly as heavy as the responsibility of maintaining the cabin and small plot of farmland Thomas had left behind. Samuel wiped the perspiration from his forehead with his sleeve, his blue eyes squinting against the morning glare. The foundation of his barn was taking shape, but there were still fences to mend, fields to clear, and a well to dig deeper before winter arrived. No time for rest, not when there was daylight to burn. He'd come west with nothing but determination and the skills his father had taught him back in Pennsylvania. At 26, he was determined to carve out something worthy of the sacrifice. "Another day, Lord," he murmured to the sky. "Give me the strength to see it through." The town of Republic was barely more than a wide spot in the trail: a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a handful of buildings clustered together like nervous cattle. Samuel made the journey once a week for supplies and occasional human contact, though he kept mostly to himself. The townsfolk knew him only as the quiet man with the strong back who'd bought Old Man Thompson's abandoned claim. Olivia tied her apron around her waist and surveyed her dwindling pantry. The harvest wouldn't come for months yet, and what little money Thomas had saved wouldn't last through summer. She'd need to find a way to support herself, but opportunities for a woman alone were scarce in these parts. She gathered her courage along with her basket and set out for town. The 5-mile walk gave her time to think, to breathe in the wild sage and pine that scented the air. Republic wasn't much, but it was civilization, and today she needed to find work. Samuel loaded his wagon with the lumber he'd cut and milled himself, planning to reinforce the north wall of his cabin before the afternoon thunderstorms rolled in. The sky was clear now, but he'd lived in Montana long enough to know how quickly that could change. His horse, a sturdy gelding named Buck, nickered softly as Samuel secured the load. "Just a few more hours, old friend," he promised, patting the animal's neck. "Then we'll both rest." The general store was busier than usual when Olivia arrived. Saturday brought the surrounding homesteaders to town for supplies and socialization. She nodded politely to Mrs. Henderson, who ran the store with her husband, and made her way to the counter. "Good morning, Mrs. Norwood," Walter Henderson greeted her, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "How are you faring today?" "Well enough, Mr. Henderson," Olivia replied, smoothing her simple calico dress. "Actually, I was wondering if you might need any help around the store. I'm looking for work." The storekeeper's expression softened with sympathy. "I wish I could help you, Mrs. Norwood, but business has been slow. We can barely keep ourselves afloat." Olivia nodded, hiding her disappointment. "I understand. If you hear of anything, would you let me know?" "Of course, my dear. Are you needing supplies today?" She purchased only what was absolutely necessary: flour, coffee, and a small bit of salt pork, mindful of her dwindling funds. As she was leaving, she nearly collided with a tall figure entering the store. "Pardon me, madam." A deep voice apologized as strong hands steadied her shoulders. Olivia looked up into the sun-bronzed face of a man she'd seen around town but never spoken to. His blue eyes were startling against his tanned skin, and a day's growth of beard shadowed his jaw. "No harm done, sir," she replied, stepping back. "Good day to you." Samuel watched the young woman hurry away, her chestnut hair gleaming in the sunlight. He recognized her as the widow Norwood, though they'd never been formally introduced. Tragedy had a way of marking people, and he could see it in the set of her shoulders, proud but burdened. He completed his own purchases quickly, anxious to return to his work. The conversation between Mrs. Norwood and Henderson lingered in his mind, however. A woman alone in this country faced almost insurmountable odds. By mid-afternoon, Samuel had secured the last board on his cabin wall when he noticed dark clouds gathering in the western sky. He'd need to hurry if he wanted to complete the roof repairs before the rain hit. Lightning flashed in the distance, and he counted the seconds until the thunder followed, still miles away, but approaching fast. Olivia had just reached her cabin when the first heavy drops began to fall. She hurried inside, relieved to have made it home before the worst of the storm. The roof leaked in 3 places, and she placed buckets to catch the water, a task that had become routine. Thomas had meant to fix it before he got sick, but never had the chance. As the storm intensified, she stoked the fire and tried not to think of how many more repairs the cabin needed. Repairs she had neither the skills nor the strength to complete herself. Pride had kept her from asking for help, but practicality was quickly overcoming that obstacle. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed everything clean. Samuel rose before the sun, as was his habit, and set out to check for damage. A massive pine had fallen across the road to town, and he spent 2 hours clearing it with his axe and saw. By the time he finished, his stomach was growling with hunger, reminding him that he'd skipped breakfast in his haste to assess the storm's aftermath. On his way back to his homestead, he passed the Norwood place and slowed his horse. The storm had torn a section of roof clean away, leaving the corner of the cabin exposed to the elements. Without thinking twice, Samuel turned Buck toward the damaged structure. Olivia was attempting to drag a fallen branch away from her garden when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She straightened, pushing a strand of hair from her face as a rider came into view. Recognition dawned as he drew closer. The man from the general store. "Mrs. Norwood," he called, dismounting. "Looks like the storm did you no favors." "No, it certainly didn't," she agreed, eyeing him cautiously. "Can I help you, Mr. Porter?" "Samuel Porter." He removed his hat. "I was passing by and noticed your roof. I have some experience with repairs if you'd allow me to take a look." Olivia hesitated. Accepting help from a strange man went against everything she'd been taught about propriety, but desperation has a way of reshaping one's principles. "That's kind of you, Mr. Porter, but I couldn't impose." Samuel glanced at the roof, then back at her. "It's no imposition, madam. That corner won't last another rainfall. I have lumber at my place that would suit the repair." She studied him for a long moment. His eyes were direct and honest, his manner respectful. "I can't pay you, Mr. Porter. I'm not asking for payment." He replaced his hat. "Just being neighborly." "Then I accept your help and I'm grateful for it." She extended her hand. "Olivia Norwood." His large hand engulfed hers briefly. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Mrs. Norwood. I'll return with materials after midday if that suits." True to his word, Samuel returned with a wagon loaded with lumber, tools, and even some tar paper for waterproofing. Olivia watched from below as he worked efficiently on her roof, his movements confident and practiced. By sunset, the repair was complete, and he declined her invitation to stay for supper, citing chores waiting at his own homestead. "Thank you, Mr. Porter," she said as he loaded his tools. I don't know how to repay such kindness. No need for repayment, he assured her. Good night, Mrs. Norwood. As Samuel drove away, Olivia stood watching until his wagon disappeared around the bend. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt something other than grief and worry, a small spark of hope that perhaps she wasn't entirely alone after all. The following week brought scorching heat that baked the earth and wilted crops. Samuel worked from first light until darkness forced him to stop, digging his well deeper in search of a more reliable water source. His skin burned and peeled, then bronzed even darker under the relentless sun. Each night, he fell into exhausted sleep, only to rise and begin again with the dawn. Olivia struggled with her own challenges. The garden required constant attention, and without Thomas's strong back to work the plow, she was reduced to using a hoe for everything, leaving her hands blistered and her back aching. She made the trip to town twice, inquiring about work at every establishment, but returned home empty-handed both times. On the third Saturday of June, Samuel was loading supplies into his wagon when he overheard a conversation between Sheriff Miller and Doc Peterson outside the general store. "Widow Norwood's place is going to ruin," the doctor was saying. "Shame to see it. Thomas built that cabin with his own hands. Nothing to be done for it," the sheriff replied. "Woman can't work that land alone, and there's no family to help her." "Someone ought to step in before she loses everything," Doc Peterson insisted. "That's good land going to waste, and she's too proud to ask for assistance." Samuel secured his purchases and mounted his horse, turning toward home. But instead of taking the direct route, he found himself heading toward the Norwood cabin. He told himself he was just being neighborly, checking to see if his roof repair had held. Olivia was on her knees in the garden, struggling to pull stubborn weeds from the hard, packed soil when she heard approaching hoofbeats. Shielding her eyes against the sun, she recognized Samuel Porter's tall figure on horseback. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Norwood," he called, dismounting. "Mr. Porter," she stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "This is a surprise. I was passing by and thought I'd check on that roof repair." His eyes moved to the garden. "Your vegetables seem to be surviving the heat." "Barely," she admitted. "I water them morning and evening, but it's hardly enough." Samuel nodded, studying the small plot. "The soil needs turning. It's too compacted to hold moisture properly." "I know," but she gestured helplessly at the plow sitting unused at the edge of the field. "I haven't the strength to manage it alone." Samuel hesitated only briefly. "I could help with that. I've finished the pressing work on my own place for now." "Mr. Porter, you've already been more than kind. I couldn't possibly, Mrs. Norwood," he interrupted gently. "I understand pride. I have plenty of my own, but out here neighbors help neighbors. It's how we all survive." Olivia looked at her struggling garden, then back at Samuel. His expression was earnest without pity. "Very well," she finally agreed, "but you must let me compensate you somehow." A smile briefly transformed his serious face. "We can discuss that after the work is done." The next morning, Samuel arrived at dawn with his own plow horse. Olivia met him at the door, surprised to see him so early. "I hope I didn't wake you," he said, removing his hat. "Not at all." "I rise with the sun." She hesitated. "Would you like some coffee before you start?" "That would be welcome, thank you." Inside the cabin, Samuel sat at the small table while Olivia poured coffee into a chipped cup. The interior was modestly furnished but clean and orderly. A Bible lay open on a small side table, and dried wildflowers brightened the windowsill. "Your home is very comfortable, Mrs. Norwood." "Thank you. It's small, but it suited us." She sat across from him. "May I ask how long you've been in Republic, Mr. Porter?" "Just over a year now." "I came west from Pennsylvania after my parents passed. Wanted to make my own way, "And are you making your way?" He smiled slightly. "Some days I think so. Others, I wonder what I've gotten myself into." He finished his coffee and stood. "I should get started before it gets too hot." Olivia watched from the porch as Samuel hitched his horse to the plow and began turning the earth. His movements were strong and sure, his broad shoulders easily handling the task that had defeated her. By midday, he had plowed the entire garden and started on the small field beyond, where Thomas had grown wheat. She brought him water and a cloth to wipe his face. "You must rest and have something to eat," she insisted. "I'm nearly finished," he replied, but accepted the water gratefully. "Please join me for dinner. It's the least I can do." Samuel hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Norwood. I would appreciate that." Inside, Olivia prepared a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and the last of her preserved peaches. She set 2 clean plates on the table, a sight that brought an unexpected ache to her heart. It had been months since she'd had reason to use more than one place setting. Samuel washed up at the pump outside before entering, his hair damp and his face clean of the day's dust. They ate mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable one. Afterward, he returned to work until the sun began to set, having plowed not just her garden but the entire small field as well. "That should give your crops a fighting chance," he said as he prepared to leave. "The soil can breathe now." "Mr. Porter, I don't know how to thank you." Olivia stood on the porch watching as he gathered his tools. "You've done a week's worth of work in a day." "It was no hardship," he assured her. "Your land is good. It deserves to be worked." "About compensation, there's no need, Mrs. Norwood." "Please," she insisted. "I can't accept so much help without giving something in return. It isn't right." Samuel considered for a moment. "There is one thing. I work long days and sometimes I don't bother with a proper meal. If you could spare a loaf of bread now and then, I'd consider us more than even." Olivia smiled, relieved to have some way to repay his kindness. "I bake fresh every other day. You're welcome to as much as you need." "That's very generous, thank you." He mounted his horse. "Good evening, Mrs. Norwood." "Good evening, Mr. Porter, and thank you again." As she watched him ride away, Olivia felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest, a lightness she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Samuel Porter was unlike any man she'd met in Republic. There was a quietness to him, a steady resolve that reminded her of the mountains themselves, solid and unchanging. The next few weeks established a pattern. Samuel would appear every few days, always at dawn, to help with whatever needed doing, mending fences, repairing the chicken coop, cutting firewood. Olivia would have hot coffee waiting, and they would talk briefly before he set to work. Sometimes he stayed for the midday meal, other times he declined, but he always accepted the bread she offered when he left. In town, people began to notice. Gossip spread as it does in small communities, some of it kind, some less so. Olivia heard the whispers when she visited the general store, speculation about the nature of her relationship with Samuel Porter, about the propriety of a widow receiving regular visits from an unmarried man. "Pay them no mind, Mrs. Henderson advised one afternoon when she saw Olivia's cheeks flush at an overheard comment. "People will talk no matter what you do. Better to have help and whispers than to lose your homestead." Samuel heard the talk too, mostly at the saloon where men felt free to speak their minds after a whiskey or two. Some suggested he had designs on the Norwood land, others implied less honorable intentions. He ignored them all, keeping to his own business and continuing to help Olivia when he could spare the time. July brought even hotter weather and the threat of drought. Samuel worked from dawn until dusk on his own homestead, struggling to keep his crops alive in the punishing heat. He dug the well deeper, but water remained a constant worry. Still, He made time every few days to check on Olivia, ensuring she had enough water for her garden and helping her construct a more efficient irrigation system. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, he arrived at her cabin just as the sun was setting. Olivia took one look at his exhausted face and insisted he stay for supper. "You look ready to fall from that horse, Mr. Porter," she said firmly. "I've stew simmering, and you will sit and eat before you ride home." Too tired to argue, Samuel accepted. Inside, the cabin was cool compared to the lingering heat outdoors. Olivia had hung wet sheets in the windows, allowing the breeze to create a natural cooling effect. The table was already set with 2 clean plates, as if she'd been expecting him. "You always set a place for me?" he asked, noting the second plate. Olivia busied herself ladling stew into bowls. "I've found it's easier to be prepared. You have a habit of appearing when I least expect it." "I apologize if I've been presumptuous." "Not at all." She set a bowl before him. "In truth, I'm grateful for the company as much as the help." They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the distant call of nightbirds outside. When they finished, Samuel insisted on helping with the washing up, despite Olivia's protests. "My mother taught me that those who eat should help clean," he explained, rolling up his sleeves. "She didn't raise me to leave work for others." Standing side by side at the washbasin, their hands occasionally brushed, sending an unexpected warmth through Olivia. She found herself studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the tiny scar above his right eyebrow. When had she started noticing such things? "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," she said, to break the silence that had suddenly become charged with something she wasn't ready to name. "She was." Samuel handed her a dried plate. "She would have liked you, I think." She valued hard work and honesty above all else. High praise indeed. Olivia placed the plate on the shelf. "And your father, a carpenter, taught me everything I know about building." He smiled at some memory. "Had no patience for laziness or excuses." "Daylight's burning, Samuel," he'd say, "even on Sundays." "Is that why you work so hard? From dawn till dusk every day?" Samuel considered the question. "Partly habit, I suppose, partly necessity. A homestead doesn't build itself." He paused. "And partly because when I'm working, I don't have time to be lonely." The admission hung between them, unexpected and honest. Olivia nodded, understanding completely. "Yes," she said softly. "I know exactly what you mean." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, recognition of a shared experience, a common understanding. For a brief moment, Olivia felt as though Samuel could see straight through to her soul. He cleared his throat and stepped back. "I should be going. It's getting late." "Of course." Olivia walked him to the door. "Thank you for your help today." "Thank you for the meal." He settled his hat on his head. "Good night, Mrs. Norwood." "Mr. Porter," she called as he reached his horse. "Samuel," he turned, surprised at her use of his given name. "You're welcome here any time," she said. "Not just to work, for company if you find yourself wanting some." A smile touched his lips, softening his features. "I'll remember that, Olivia. Thank you." She watched him ride away, the twilight swallowing his figure until only the sound of hoofbeats remained. Inside, she cleared away the second plate, her fingers lingering on the clean ceramic. For the first time in months, she'd enjoyed not just a meal but the sharing of it with someone else. That night, lying in her bed, Olivia found herself thinking of Samuel not as the helpful neighbor, but as the man. His gentle strength, his quiet dignity, the way his rare smiles transformed his serious face. She turned onto her side, troubled by the direction of her thoughts. Thomas had been gone less than 6 months. Was it disloyal to find herself drawn to another man so soon across the miles, in his own cabin? Samuel lay awake with similar thoughts. Olivia Norwood had gotten under his skin somehow, with her determination and grace in the face of adversity. He admired her that much he could admit freely, but the way his heart had raced when their hands touched at the wash basin suggested something deeper than admiration. "Fool," he muttered to himself in the darkness. "She's a recent widow. She needs a friend, not a suitor." But as he drifted toward sleep, it was Olivia's face he saw, her green eyes alight with unexpected laughter when he told her about his first disastrous attempt at plowing. The delicate curve of her neck as she bent to serve their meal, the gentle strength in her slender hands. August arrived with punishing heat that scorched the land and tested even the most resilient homesteaders. Samuel rose each day before the sun, working through the coolest hours of morning, then again after the worst of the afternoon heat had passed. His crops were surviving, but barely. The well provided enough water for his needs and those of his animals, but not much more. Olivia's garden fared better, thanks to the improved irrigation system Samuel had helped her build. The vegetables were thriving, providing enough for her needs with some surplus that she preserved for winter. The small wheat field, however, was struggling in the drought. Their routine continued, Samuel visiting every few days to help with heavier work, Olivia providing meals and freshly baked bread in return. But something had shifted between them since that evening in July. Their conversations came more easily, lingered longer. Samuel found reasons to stay for supper more often, and Olivia always had that second plate ready. The townsfolk noticed the change. At church on Sundays, Olivia felt the weight of speculative glances, heard the hushed conversations that stopped when she approached. Most were kind, but not all. Some thought it inappropriate for her to be receiving regular visits from a bachelor, especially one as reticent and solitary as Samuel Porter. "Folks are talking," Sheriff Miller mentioned casually to Samuel one Saturday in town, "about you and the widow Norwood." Samuel continued loading supplies into his wagon. People should mind their own affairs. "Just saying, a woman alone is vulnerable to gossip. If your intentions are honorable, you might want to make them clear." "My intentions," Samuel said evenly, "are to be a good neighbor, nothing more." But even as he spoke the words, he knew they weren't entirely true. His feelings for Olivia had grown beyond neighborly concern or even friendship. He found himself thinking of her throughout the day, looking forward to their time together, inventing reasons to visit her cabin. He admired her quiet strength, her resilience, the way she faced each day with determination despite her loss. And sometimes, when their eyes met over a shared meal or their hands brushed accidentally, he thought he saw something in her expression that suggested she might feel the same way. But was it too soon? Would pursuing such feelings be taking advantage of her vulnerability? Late one afternoon, as Samuel was finishing repairs on his barn roof, he spotted a rider approaching from the direction of town. He climbed down, recognizing Doc Peterson's bay mare. "Afternoon, Porter," the doctor called, dismounting stiffly. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. What brings you out this way, Doc, making rounds to the outlying homesteads, checking on folks with this heat?" He accepted the dipper of water Samuel offered. "Also wanted to talk to you about Mrs. Norwood." Samuel tensed. "What about her?" "She had a spell in town yesterday. Nearly fainted in the general store. Said she hadn't been sleeping well, but I'm concerned she's not eating properly." The doctor fixed Samuel with a direct look. "I know you've been helping her out. Thought you should be aware." "Is she all right now?" She insisted on returning home. "Stubborn woman." Doc Peterson shook his head. "I'd have gone there today, but I had patients in town. Thought maybe you could check on her." "I'll ride over now," Samuel said, already moving toward the stable. "Thank you for letting me know." The sun was low in the sky by the time Samuel reached Olivia's cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney despite the heat, suggesting she was cooking. He dismounted, relieved to see signs of normal activity but still concerned. His knock was answered quickly, as if she'd been near the door. Olivia looked pale but managed a smile when she saw him. "Samuel, this is a surprise. Doc Peterson mentioned you weren't feeling well yesterday. I wanted to make sure you're all right." "That man worries too much," she said, but her voice lacked its usual firmness. "It was just the heat. Please come in." Inside, the cabin was stifling despite the open windows. A pot bubbled on the stove, filling the small space with steam. Samuel immediately moved to the stove. "Sit down, Olivia. I'll take care of this." Too weary to argue, she sank into a chair while Samuel removed the pot from the heat and opened the door to create a cross breeze. "When did you last eat?" he asked, noting the single place setting on the table. "I had some bread this morning," she admitted. "I've been canning vegetables all day and lost track of time." Samuel found bread and cheese in her pantry and set them before her. "Eat. Then we'll talk." She complied, her hunger asserting itself once she began. Samuel sat across from her, watching with concern as color gradually returned to her cheeks. "Doc said you haven't been sleeping," he prompted when she'd finished. Olivia sighed. "It's nothing serious. Just dreams. They wake me and then I find it hard to go back to sleep." "Dreams about your husband, sometimes." She traced the wood grain of the table with her fingertip. "Sometimes about the future. Worries about what will happen if I can't maintain this place alone." "You're not alone, Olivia." The words came out more intensely than he'd intended. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. "No," she said softly. "I'm beginning to realize that." Something shifted in the air between them, a current of understanding that needed no words. Samuel reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "I care about what happens to you," he said simply. "More than I should, perhaps." "And I care about you," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, "which terrifies me at times." Samuel's heart raced at her admission. "Why does it frighten you?" "Because I wasn't expecting it. Because it feels too soon. Because I'm afraid of losing someone again." She turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining. "Because I don't know what people would think. People will think what they will, regardless of what we do." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "But I understand your concerns." "There's no need to rush anything." "What is this, Samuel, between us?" he considered carefully before answering. "Something worth exploring, I think, when you're ready." She nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "I think so too." The tension that had built between them eased, replaced by a comfortable certainty. Whatever was growing between them would develop in its own time. For now, it was enough to acknowledge its existence. Samuel stayed to share the simple supper Olivia had been preparing. And for the first time, they spoke openly about their lives before Republic. She told him about growing up in Missouri, about meeting Thomas when she was 18, about their dreams of building a life in Montana Territory. He shared stories of his childhood in Pennsylvania, of learning carpentry from his father, of his decision to head west after his parents died within months of each other. When it was time for him to leave, he lingered at the door. "Will you be all right tonight?" he asked. "I could sleep in the barn if you're concerned about being alone." "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Knowing you're nearby is comfort enough, and I suspect I'll sleep better tonight than I have in weeks." Impulsively, she stood on tiptoe and pressed a kiss to his cheek. "Thank you, Samuel, for everything." He caught her hand as she started to step back, his eyes searching hers. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers, a question more than a kiss. Her answer was to rest her free hand against his chest and return the pressure of his lips just for a moment before they both drew back. "Good night, Olivia," he said, his voice deeper than usual. "Good night, Samuel." He mounted Buck and rode away, his thoughts in pleasant turmoil. The brief kiss had confirmed what he'd suspected for weeks. His feelings for Olivia Norwood ran far deeper than neighborly concern. And miracle of miracles, she seemed to return those feelings. The next few weeks brought subtle changes to their relationship. Samuel still came to help with various tasks, and Olivia still provided meals and bread in return. But there was a new awareness between them, a current of possibility that hummed in the air. Their conversations grew more personal, their touches more deliberate, a hand at the small of her back as he guided her through a doorway, her fingers lingering on his arm as she passed him tools. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the promise of harvest. Samuel's crops had survived the summer heat, though the yield would be less than he'd hoped. Still, it would be enough to see him through the winter, with some surplus to sell or trade. Olivia's garden had flourished under their combined care, producing an abundance of vegetables that kept her busy canning and preserving. The small wheat field had struggled, but there would be enough flour for her needs, if not extra to sell. On a crisp Saturday morning, Samuel arrived at Olivia's cabin with an invitation. "There's a harvest social at the church next weekend," he said as they sat drinking coffee on her porch. "I thought perhaps we might attend together." Olivia looked surprised. "You want to go to a social?" "I'm not much for gatherings," he admitted with a small smile. "But I'd like to escort you if you're willing." She hesitated, understanding what he was really asking. Attending a social together would make public what had been developing privately between them. It would announce to the community that they were more than neighbors. "Are you sure, Samuel? People will talk. Let them. I'm not ashamed of my feelings for you, Olivia." His blue eyes held her steadily. "But if you think it's too soon—" "No," she interrupted, her decision made. "I'd be honored to accompany you." The day of the social brought clear skies and pleasant temperatures, perfect weather for the outdoor gathering. Olivia spent extra time on her appearance, wearing her best dress, a deep green calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and arranging her hair in a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun. Samuel arrived promptly at noon, dressed in clean trousers and a white shirt, his usually unruly hair slicked neatly back. He stared appreciatively when she opened the door. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "And you're very handsome," she replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. He offered his arm with a formality that made her smile, and they set off for town in his wagon, the back loaded with vegetables from Olivia's garden to contribute to the communal feast. The churchyard was decorated with autumn flowers and colorful ribbons. Tables groaned under the weight of food, and a small band played lively tunes. Nearly everyone from Republic and the surrounding homesteads had turned out for the celebration. Their arrival together caused exactly the stir they'd expected. Conversations paused, heads turned, and whispers followed them as Samuel escorted Olivia through the crowd. But they also received many warm greetings and genuine smiles, particularly from those who had worried about Olivia managing alone. "About time you two made it official," Doc Peterson said with a wink as they passed. "Been watching this develop all summer." Mrs. Henderson beamed at them. "You make a fine couple. And Samuel, it does my heart good to see you socializing instead of working yourself to the bone." Not all reactions were positive. Samuel noticed a few disapproving glances, particularly from older women who perhaps thought Olivia's mourning period insufficient. And Thomas Norwood's former friend, Jack Wilson, watched them with narrowed eyes from beside the cider barrel. But overall, the community's response was supportive, if curious. By the time they joined the dancing late in the afternoon, most people had accepted the new development with equanimity. Samuel proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, guiding Olivia confidently through a lively reel. When the music shifted to a slower waltz, he drew her closer, one hand at her waist. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Very much." She smiled up at him. "Though I confess, I didn't expect you to be such an accomplished dancer. My mother insisted I learn, said no son of hers would disgrace himself at social functions." His expression grew tender. "I'm glad now that she was so insistent, as am I." Olivia let herself relax into his embrace, aware of curious eyes but no longer concerned by them. "Samuel, I've been thinking about what you said about exploring what's between us. And I'm ready. Whatever this is, I want to see where it leads." The smile that spread across his face transformed his features, erasing the habitual seriousness. "That makes me very happy, Olivia." As the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes and headed back to Olivia's cabin. The ride was peaceful, both of them content in the knowledge that something important had changed that day. Their relationship was no longer a private matter for better or worse. It was now acknowledged by the community. At her door, Samuel took both her hands in his. "Thank you for coming with me today. It meant a great deal. Thank you for asking me." She looked up at him, her heart full. "Would you like to come in for supper?" "I would, but I should see to my animals. May I return tomorrow? I'll be waiting." She squeezed his hands. "With a hot meal and 2 clean plates." He laughed softly at the reference to what had become a private joke between them, her always ready second-place setting. Then, with a gentleness that made her breath catch, he tilted her chin up and kissed her properly, not the hesitant brush of lips they'd shared before, but a kiss that spoke of deepening feelings and future possibilities. When they parted, Olivia's cheeks were flushed and Samuel's eyes were dark with emotion. "Until tomorrow," he said, his voice husky. "Until tomorrow," she echoed. As his wagon disappeared down the road, Olivia hugged herself, filled with a happiness she hadn't dared hope for when the year began. Life had dealt her a terrible blow with Thomas's death. But somehow, against all odds, she'd found a second chance at love. The weeks that followed were the happiest Olivia had known since Thomas's illness. Samuel came every evening after finishing his own work, sometimes staying for supper, other times just sitting with her on the porch as twilight settled over the land. They talked of everything and nothing, their pasts, their hopes, their daily concerns. And with each conversation, each shared silence, the bond between them deepened. October brought the first frost, painting the landscape in silver and signaling the approach of winter. Samuel worked with renewed intensity, preparing his homestead for the coming cold. Olivia did the same, though her tasks were lighter thanks to Samuel's continuing help. One crisp afternoon, as they worked together stacking firewood beside her cabin, Samuel broached a subject that had been on his mind. "Winter's coming fast," he observed, positioning another log on the growing pile. "Yes, earlier than last year, I think." Olivia handed him another piece of wood. "My father always said you could tell by how thick the squirrels' tails grew. I've been thinking about the months ahead." Samuel paused, choosing his words carefully. "About you here alone." She straightened, studying his expression. "I'll manage, Samuel. I have plenty of food stored and enough firewood to last until spring." "I know you're capable, Olivia. That's not my concern." He set down the log and turned to face her fully. "I'm worried about not being able to reach you if there's trouble. The snow gets deep between our places." "What are you suggesting?" Samuel took a deep breath. "That perhaps you shouldn't be here alone." "Samuel Porter, are you proposing to me?" Olivia asked, her tone caught between amusement and shock. "Not exactly. Or not yet? He ran a hand through his hair, uncharacteristically flustered. I'm suggesting that perhaps we should consider marriage before winter sets in, but I didn't want to presume. Olivia laid a finger against his lips, stopping his rambling explanation. Ask me properly, Samuel, if that's what you want. His expression softened, and he took her hands in his. Olivia Norwood, I love you. I believe I started falling in love with you the first time I saw you waiting on your porch with coffee after I'd fixed your roof. You're the strongest, most gracious woman I've ever known, and I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me? Tears sprang to Olivia's eyes, but they were tears of joy. Yes, Samuel, I will marry you. He gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an uncharacteristic display of exuberance. When he set her down, his expression grew serious again. Are you certain, Olivia? It hasn't been very long since Thomas died, she finished for him. I know, and I will always honor his memory, but life is too uncertain, too precious to waste when we've found something real. She touched his cheek gently. I love you, Samuel. I want to be your wife. Their kiss sealed the promise, a pledge of love and commitment as the autumn sun gilded the world around them in gold. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Republic. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, attended by most of the town's residents. Olivia wore a new dress of deep blue, made specially for the occasion, and carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers. Samuel, looking uncharacteristically nervous, waited for her at the altar in a new suit ordered from the catalog at considerable expense. Doc Peterson gave the bride away, having become a father figure of sorts to Olivia since Thomas's death. Mrs. Henderson wept openly throughout the ceremony, while her husband beamed beside her. Even Sheriff Miller looked moved as the couple exchanged vows. I, Samuel, take thee, Olivia, to be my lawful wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. Olivia's voice was clear and confident as she repeated the same promise. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed her with tender reverence, oblivious to the cheers and applause that filled the small church. The celebration afterward was joyful, with music and dancing continuing well into the evening. As darkness fell, the newlyweds slipped away, boarding Samuel's wagon for the journey to what would now be their home, Samuel's larger, sturdier cabin. Olivia would maintain her own property as well, the 2 homesteads providing twice the land for their future together. But for now, all that mattered was the night ahead and the lifetime of days that would follow. As Samuel helped her down from the wagon, Olivia paused to look up at the star-filled sky. It's beautiful tonight. Yes, it is, he agreed, but his eyes were on her, not the stars. Welcome home, Mrs. Porter. She smiled at her new name, still unfamiliar but already dear. It feels right, being here with you. He lifted her into his arms with ease, carrying her across the threshold as tradition demanded. Inside, the cabin was warm and welcoming. Samuel had spent days preparing for her arrival, building new furniture, hanging curtains at the windows, making space for her belongings. On the table sat 2 clean plates, waiting for the morning's breakfast. I thought we could start our own tradition, he explained when he saw her notice them. 2 plates, always ready for us to share a meal together. Tears of happiness filled Olivia's eyes. I love that idea, and I love you, Samuel Porter. And I love you, Olivia Porter, more than I ever thought possible. Their life together began that night, in the warmth and privacy of their home, with whispered promises and tender discoveries. And when dawn broke clear and cold over the Montana hills, Samuel rose first, as was his habit, to stoke the fire and prepare coffee. Olivia joined him soon after, wrapped in a quilt against the morning chill. They shared a simple breakfast at the table with its two clean plates, talking quietly about the day ahead and all the days to follow. Later, Samuel would go out to work his land, laboring from dawn till dusk as he always had. But now he worked with the knowledge that when darkness fell, Olivia would be waiting with a hot meal and those two clean plates, symbols of the home and life they were building together. The winter of 1872-1873 proved to be harsh even by Montana standards. Snow piled deep around their cabin, and temperatures dropped to bone-chilling lows that tested even the sturdiest structures. But inside, Samuel and Olivia created a haven of warmth and comfort. Their evenings were spent by the fire, reading aloud from Samuel's small collection of books or Olivia's family Bible, planning improvements for the spring, or simply enjoying each other's company. They established routines that suited them both. Samuel still worked from dawn till dusk whenever weather permitted, maintaining his homestead and making regular trips to check on Olivia's property. Olivia kept their home, prepared their meals, and worked on quilts and clothing for the future. Each night, they shared supper at the table with its two clean plates, talking over the day's events before retiring to the warmth of their shared bed. It was a simple life, but a deeply satisfying one. They had enough food in the pantry, firewood stacked high, and most importantly, each other. By February, there was another blessing to celebrate. Olivia discovered she was expecting their first child, due in late summer. Samuel's joy at the news was boundless. He immediately began planning an addition to their cabin and crafting a cradle from pine, what he'd been saving for a special project. "You want a boy or a girl?" Olivia asked one evening as they sat by the fire, her sewing basket beside her as she worked on tiny garments. "Either would be a blessing," Samuel replied, looking up from the cradle he was sanding. "Though I confess, I picture a daughter with your green eyes and smile, and I imagine a son with your strength and quiet determination." She rested a hand on her still flat stomach. "Either way, this child will be loved. More than they can possibly know," Samuel agreed, setting aside his work to join her on the settee. He placed his hand over hers. "You've given me more happiness than I ever thought to find, Olivia." "As you have me." She leaned against his shoulder. "When Thomas died, I thought my chance at happiness had ended. I never imagined I would find love again, especially not so soon. Do you ever regret it, marrying me so quickly after your loss?" "Never." Her answer was immediate and firm. "Life is too uncertain to waste time when your heart knows what it wants." She turned to look at him directly. "Do you have regrets? Only that I didn't find you sooner." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "But then, perhaps we needed to follow the paths that led us to each other, exactly when we were ready to recognize what we'd found." Spring arrived with its usual chaotic mix of mud, lingering snow, and sudden warm days that hinted at summer's approach. As the land awakened from its winter slumber, Samuel and Olivia began implementing their plans for expanding both homesteads. At Olivia's former cabin, they expanded the garden and planted a larger field of wheat, taking advantage of the irrigation system they'd established the previous summer. At their main home, Samuel added 2 rooms to the cabin, a nursery for the coming baby and a larger kitchen for Olivia. Their life together settled into a rhythm dictated by the seasons and the land. Samuel still worked from dawn till dusk, but now he returned each evening to Olivia waiting with a hot meal and those 2 clean plates that had become symbols of their shared life. June brought news from back east that saddened them both. Samuel's uncle, his father's brother and last remaining family member, had passed away. With the letter came an unexpected inheritance, enough money to make significant improvements to their homestead, and ensure their future security. "It feels strange," Samuel confessed as they discussed how to use the funds, "to benefit from someone's passing." "Your uncle would want his legacy to help his family," Olivia assured him, her hand resting on her now visible pregnancy. "We'll use it wisely, to build something that would make him proud." They decided to invest most of the money in expanding their operation, better equipment for farming, more livestock, and improvements to both properties. They also set aside a portion for their child's future education, something both valued highly. The summer passed in a blur of activity. Samuel hired 2 young men from town to help with the heaviest work, allowing him to complete projects that would have taken months on his own. Olivia supervised the improvements to their home, including the installation of a proper cookstove to replace the more primitive fireplace cooking she'd been doing throughout it all. Their relationship deepened. The initial passion of new love matured into something more enduring, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared goals, and unwavering commitment. They still had their disagreements, of course. Samuel's tendency to work too hard and too long sometimes clashed with Olivia's concern for his health. Her independent streak occasionally bristled at his protective nature. But they learned to navigate these differences with patience and understanding. As Olivia's pregnancy progressed, Samuel found himself watching her with increasing wonder and protective devotion. She remained active, insisting on continuing her normal duties as much as possible, but he made certain she rested adequately and had help for the more strenuous tasks. On a scorching August afternoon, while Samuel was repairing a fence on the far side of their property, Olivia felt the first pains that signaled their child's imminent arrival. She sent one of the hired hands to fetch both Samuel and Doc Peterson from town. Samuel arrived first, galloping into the yard with fear etched on his face. He found Olivia calmly preparing the bedroom, laying out clean linens and the tiny clothes she'd made over the winter. "Olivia, are you all right? How far apart are the pains?" "I'm fine, Samuel," she assured him with a calm she didn't entirely feel. "The pains are still quite far apart. Doc Peterson will be here soon." Despite her reassurances, Samuel paced anxiously, following her instructions to heat water and bring more lanterns to the bedroom. When the doctor arrived an hour later, he shooed Samuel from the room with firm instructions to wait outside. The hours that followed were the longest of Samuel's life. He paced the porch, wincing at each cry that reached his ears from inside, praying with an intensity he hadn't known since his mother's final illness. The hired hands tactfully made themselves scarce, understanding a man's need for privacy during such a time. As twilight deepened into night, the sounds from inside changed. A final cry from Olivia was followed by a brief, tense silence, then the unmistakable wail of a newborn. Samuel froze, his heart pounding, until Doc Peterson appeared at the door with a broad smile. "Congratulations, Porter. You have a fine, healthy son, and your wife is doing splendidly." Samuel's legs nearly gave way with relief. "Thank God, may I see them? Of course. She's asking for you." Inside the bedroom, lit by the warm glow of lanterns, Olivia sat propped against pillows, her face tired but radiant. In her arms, wrapped in one of the blankets she'd quilted during the winter, was a tiny bundle. "Samuel," she whispered as he approached, "come meet your son." He sat carefully beside her on the bed, almost afraid to breathe as she placed the infant in his arms. The baby was small but perfect, with a shock of dark hair and Samuel's cleft chin. As he watched, the tiny eyes opened, revealing a deep blue that might eventually change to match Olivia's green. "He's beautiful," Samuel whispered, overcome with emotion, "just like his mother." "We need a name for him," Olivia said, leaning against Samuel's shoulder to gaze at their child. "I was thinking perhaps James, after your father, James Thomas Porter," Samuel suggested, honoring both his father and Olivia's first husband. "If that wouldn't be too difficult for you." "It's perfect," she agreed, tears of happiness welling in her eyes. "A name with history and meaning." Doc Peterson slipped quietly from the room, leaving the new family to their privacy. Outside, the Montana sky spread above their homestead, stars glittering like diamonds on velvet. Inside, by lantern light, Samuel and Olivia marveled at the tiny life they'd created together, a new beginning, a promise for the future. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges, as all lives do. Young James grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's quiet determination and his mother's gentle spirit. He was joined 2 years later by a sister, Sarah Elizabeth, who had Olivia's chestnut hair and Samuel's startling blue eyes. The Porter homestead flourished under their combined care. The inheritance money, wisely invested, allowed them to expand their operations until they had one of the most successful farms in the Republic area. Olivia's original cabin became a home for their hired help, and later, a schoolhouse when enough neighboring families settled nearby to warrant one. Through it all, Samuel and Olivia maintained their simple tradition. No matter how busy the day, how challenging the work, they came together each evening at their table with its 2 clean plates, sharing a meal and the events of their day. Even as their family expanded, those 2 plates remained a symbol of where their story began, with a widowed woman's determination to survive, and a solitary man's decision to be a good neighbor. In 1892, on their 20th wedding anniversary, Samuel presented Olivia with a gift he'd been crafting in secret for months, a new dining table large enough to seat their growing family, including James's new bride. But at one end, set slightly apart, were 2 place settings made of fine china he'd ordered from back east, each engraved with their initials. "For us," he explained as she traced the delicate patterns with her finger. "So we always remember how we began." "As if I could ever forget," Olivia replied, her green eyes, still bright despite the passing years, meeting his with the same warmth they'd always held for him. "You worked from dawn till dusk, and I waited with a hot meal and 2 clean plates. And I came home to the greatest blessing a man could ask for," Samuel added, taking her hands in his. "A love that made everything worthwhile." Outside their window, the Montana sunset painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, a fitting backdrop for a love story that had begun with simple neighborly kindness and grown into a lifetime of shared joy. 2 separate paths had converged into one, creating a legacy of love that would endure long after the last light faded from the western sky.